Most of the slides in this series come from a treasure that was found in East Anglia, which is in the eastern central part of England, called the Nottus Ooh treasure. The Nottus Ooh treasure was actually excavated after World War II, but the mounds in which it was contained were discovered just before the war in 1939 on the lands of a retired military officer by the name of Colonel Pretty. He allowed the British Museum and other archaeologists put together by the museum to come in and excavate these mounds, which were clearly burial mounds from some ancient burial, though at that point it was not clear. After the war was over, they went in and dug up the mounds and discovered that it was a ship burial, and this was a kind of burial that the Anglo-Saxons used, and that it was quite early. They discovered gold and silver and coissinet, which is enamel work in which the colors are kept separate by using very fine metal wires. You'll see it here very clearly. You can make it out on this image in front of you, which is the lid of a purse. In that purse were found coins, some of them Anglo-Saxon, but some of them also Frankish, coming from the continent, and they make it possible to say certainly that this burial took place after 654 CE, probably very shortly after 654. 654, 655 is usually the date given. There was no body in this burial. It was a cenotaph, which is a funeral monument without a body in it, and no one has any idea what happened to the body. That is, it does not appear to have been buried in this mound at any time. It was not stolen or anything. It is possible that the body was put on a boat and shoved out to sea. That was another form of burial of the ancient Germans, particularly those who lived by the sea and who traveled on the sea. And the Anglo-Saxons who came to England obviously were of that type. This purse lid is quite extraordinary. As you can see, it would have had a leather pouch attached to it. The motifs you see are very closely related to Celtic art, and it's very clear that as the Germans moved into Europe and displaced the Celts, they absorbed a good deal of Celtic artistic tradition, which was quite advanced and which favored surface decoration, which you will see again and again through this set of slides. In the slides, I've included a couple of things that come from Celtic manuscripts, Irish manuscripts, and you'll see the relationships very clearly. So let's now go on and look at some of the parts of this lid a little bit more closely. This is the bird of prey. As you can see, that it is attacking a duck, and there are actually two of them on the lid. The bird of prey, the hawk, was one of the symbols of the Germanic god Woden. It's very clear that this burial was a pagan burial, even though by the 650s a large percentage of the Anglo-Saxons were converted to Christianity. You can see here the checkerboard patterns that are used on the legs of the two birds and also below on the band of decoration, and that is really hard to do. Enamel is crushed glass with pigments in it, and you apply it the way you would apply a paint, and then you fire it at a very hot fire, and it melts the glass and fuses it, and for that reason enamel lasts forever. And it's very hard to keep the colors separate from one another. You can see that in normal coissinet, they use the metal filigree to give shape to the different colors and separate them. You can see that on the wings of the two birds and the tails. But you can also see that there are on the legs apparently checkerboard patterns that were painted in very carefully, and there may be something underneath there that keeps the colors separate, but it had to be done with extraordinary care and high precision. Note also the metal work at the bottom along the edge of the lid. It's a very intricate gold work that shows how skilled these early Germanic artists were. Here we're back at the lid of the purse, and this is a hexagonal decoration for one of the side hinges. It's the one on the right in the picture of the lid as a whole. You can see that work that they're doing here, but you can see that aside from the kind of intertwining, free-flowing decoration that you saw in the decoration of the central hinge and also on the carpet page of the Book of Durrow. You also get a lot of geometric work, and this is much more of that sort, and you'll see much more of this style as well. And this is also sometimes characteristic of Celtic art, but it seems more characteristic of the Germans. They were more interested in the geometric than the Celts were. Here's a collection of things. This would have been attached to some kind of a leather belt, probably a sword belt. The Germans did not use horses very much, certainly not in war. And this would have been the buckle in the center. Two pyramidal decorations that would have been used over knots in part of the belt, and then a strap decoration that would have been bolted on, as you can see, to the strap for decoration, perhaps at a spot, for example, near the shoulder, where you wanted some extra protection, so that in true fighting equipment, this stuff, of course, is all ceremonial, but in true fighting equipment, you'd have this kind of metal decoration at points where you expected to be hit, and so they were protection for the belt and for your own person. We're going to get a close-up look at a couple of these things as well. Here's the buckle, and you can see that it's similar to the way we make our buckles, functioned in precisely the same way. And that would be true also of much older things from the Germans. The Germans were, among the things that made them appear to the Romans as barbarians, was that the Celts and the Germans wore trousers. And trousers needed to be held up with things, whether it was suspender-like things or belts. And so the Germans developed the equipment you need to make belts work, and buckles are among the primary pieces of such equipment. And you can see that as here, and you would see this in many, many finds from this period and from earlier. Buckles were often highly decorated. And here again you see the geometric approach to decoration. And this is early cloisonné. The red is enamel, and of course the gold is the metal that separates it. Here's a close-up side view of the two knot pyramids. There's a loop inside that would attach to the knot, and this would both protect the knot and decorate it. The knot, obviously, in a sword belt would hold the sword or hold the scabbard when the sword was drawn, or be part of a tassel arrangement for the sword's decoration. And the knot is a part of that that stands out and therefore a natural place for decoration. Here's the pyramids looking at them from the top, and you can see the beautiful checkerboard work that was done at the center at the top. These are really quite magnificent, and the use of this, both the colors and the technique and the checkerboard, suggests that this work was all done by one atelier. You don't have to suppose that it was done by one person, though there probably was a master craftsman with assistance, and he was making sure that everything came out exactly as he wanted, and probably the one doing the most difficult parts of this, such as the checkerboard work. This is one of the most beautiful pieces in the collection. It is a clasp, and you can see the hinge at the center. The decoration is quite wonderful and just extraordinary. He does a lot of the checkerboard type decoration, though here it's varied. He uses it within these little medallions and in different colors. The metal work is amazing, and the cloisonné is amazing. Note, by the way, that there's a subtle pattern underneath the color on the main panels of this piece. They would have incised the gold, and then that would show through when the enamel was melted, because the enamel, being glass, and if you handle the colors right, can be translucent, and that's the way it is here. When a person was buried, he or she was buried with grave goods. These were implements for the afterlife. In some cases, that included bowls and cups and probably food that was in those things. Those, in a case like this one, a royal burial, and this is certainly a royal burial, very often, by the way, called King Anna, supposing that he was the one who died. There was such a person, and there was a person who died around this time, in 654, and so it's a possibility, though there's no certainty. But these bowls were usually silver or copper, and they were decorated with what are called escutcheons. The escutcheons could be attached a handle of some kind, and in this case you can see there's a loop at about 10 o'clock on this circle, and that probably held some kind of a strap that held the bowl by which you could lift the bowl, say if it was hot or if you were packing it on your belt to take it somewhere. You can see that the escutcheon work is done very carefully, and you can see here in this picture the way in which they have introduced animal motifs in the filigree work. And that is usually taken, as I said earlier, as a characteristic German approach. This particular thing looks like it's done by a craftsman different from the one who did the earlier work we were looking at, but somebody who was extraordinary. The evenness of the circles, the way in which they're done, is really quite remarkable. It's obviously done with a compass. We should also notice the silver wire work which is used for the border of this escutcheon. It's really quite a terrific and complicated, subtle piece of work. Picking up on the comparison with the Irish, here's another page, again a carpet page, from the Book of Durrow. Durrow, by the way, was a monastery in Ireland, founded in 553, and this page shows you the animal motifs that became more and more common as the Irish came into contact with the Anglo-Saxons. And the Anglo-Saxons had arrived in England starting in the 450s and had migrated in usually small tribal groups, and eventually toward the end of the 5th century had pushed the Celts to the west, where they remained in Wales, in Ireland. Some of them crossed over to Ireland. When they crossed over to Ireland, they shoved the Scots who lived in Ireland back to the north and across the water to what now is called Scotland. And so there was a lot of contact, and it's clear that the Irish artists absorbed some of the motifs from the Germans, and certainly vice versa. The Germans had been absorbing Celtic art for centuries by that point. How far could you take this way of creating pages decoratively? Here's an example. This is the Book of Kells, about a century after Sutton Hoo and the Book of Durrow. This is a book of the most interesting sort. It is regarded as one of the great books ever created. It is a gospel, that is, it contains the 4 gospels. It comes from a monastery of Kells, again an Irish monastery. This work has several pages that are like this, intricately done. It must have taken months to do a single page. This page is the page that starts Matthew 1, verse 18, where the evangelist tells of the birth of Jesus and his genealogy. It says Chi, that's the X, Rho, that's the P-like figure with the man's head in it, and then I, which runs through the P. Chi, Rho, I, Christi, was a symbol for Jesus. The Chi Rho was used with an S or an I or an O, depending on the Latin form of the word, but the Greek letters, Chi and Rho, which were the first 2 letters of the Greek form of Christ, were always used as an abbreviation throughout the Middle Ages for Christ. And so we have the Chi Rho page. It is like a carpet page, but in fact it has text in it, so that it is more of an illuminated capital, but an illuminated capital normally only has 1 letter, and this one has 3. At the bottom it says H, probably for hike, H-A-E-C, this, and generatio, the generation or birth of Jesus. This is a variant. The text actually that has been accepted is Christi autem generatio. Autem means moreover, or and now we talk about that, something of that sort. But here there's a variant with the H which appears to have an abbreviation symbol over it, and that would indicate Haec generatio Christi, this birth or this story of the birth of Jesus. Back to Sutton Hoo. This is a piece that was found in the mound. It is a scepter. It confirms that the man who was buried there was a king, and it's made of soft stone, a soapstone, carved at the top and the bottom, as you can see, and beautifully shaped, with both a metal base and a metal top. And the top with the ring that has a heart on the top of it. The heart was one of the symbols of Woden, the Germanic god, and the Anglo-Saxon kings claimed to have descent from Woden. They called themselves Woden-sprung gods. And so they carried in their symbology the symbols of Woden. The hart is one of them. Woden was a god of the forests. The raven was his companion. The bird of prey, the hart, the animals of the forest were among his symbols. The king would have carried a shield, in this case, of course, a symbolic shield. It was a real shield, but it certainly would not have been carried in war. The shields that they carried typically were very thick leather applied in layers. They could take quite a lot of punishment before they were broken through or ruined. They also had various kinds of metal bosses on them, certainly a central boss, which was a large piece, a large round piece, which was raised, and you could use these various metal pieces to help ward off or deflect sword blows, and they could be used by a skilled man very successfully. You can see that around the edge are a whole series of these kind of metal pieces, in this case, of course, very finely wrought, that would also have strengthened the shield and made it more difficult for an opponent to cut through it. One of the parts of the shield, one of the ceremonial bosses on this ceremonial shield, was a dragon. Here it is close up. You can see the very careful and intricate metal work. You can see that they have done the kind of intertwining decoration on the surface of the metal that they also did in cloisonné work. You can also see that the mouth of this beast seems to be open and that something's coming out of it, and that's probably fire and smoke, because they believed that dragons blew fire and smoke at their enemies. You'll meet a dragon at the end of Beowulf. He's a fearsome creature, and here he is in symbolic representation. You can see also that they used gems in this work. You see it in various parts of the treasure. They didn't cut their gems the way moderns do. They didn't facet them the way moderns do. They didn't have those techniques, but they polished them and used them, especially in their metalwork. Here's the central boss. This is a close-up. You can see the way it's structured. The structure itself is not different from what an actual fighting shield would have had on it, but of course this has got a decoration that's quite different. It's silver with gilt on it. You can see still quite a lot of the gold, and its center is cloisonné. But the way this thing looks, it would deflect, but it also could be used because of its structure to catch a sword. Not catch it in the sense of actually grab it, but hold it up, and that was an advantage to the man wielding the shield, because he of course had a sword or a spear in his other hand. Here you're looking at the center of the central boss. You can see that it has cloisonné in its center, but it also has enamel circles and spots around the edge of it, and it is carefully worked as a piece of metal, both in the beading that you see in the circuits. You can see how perfect these circles are. They're obviously done with compasses, and also in the working of the outer rim, the main outer rim around the cloisonné. This is really quite a terrific piece of work that would have had, and you can still see traces of it, would have been covered in gold to set off against the red of the enamel. There's a hatchwork under the enamel as well that you can see up this close, and again the translucence of the enamel allows you to see it and gives it texture, character. This in many ways is the piece de resistance of the entire collection. It is the helmet. It is a typical Anglo-Saxon or Germanic helmet. They use these helmets with ear pieces that flapped up and that could be tied under the chin, and face pieces that could also be flipped up to reveal the face. This obviously is a highly ceremonial piece of work. It's silver and gold, and it took years and years to put it back together again. It was found in tiny fragments, and they laid it out on a table, and people who worked in the museum came by and tinkered with it over a period of 10 years or so until they finally had put the whole thing back together again. And so this is reassembled, and you can see how amazing it is. Here are two close-ups, one of them not very good, but I wanted you to see it. Over the eyebrows, there are two panels of battling animals. Perhaps one's a bull, one's a human, or they're humans in masks and helmets that are made to look like animals, but they're battle scenes which are appropriate to this kind of implement. Next to that is the nose and the ridge. Of course, the helmet would have a ridge for the same reason that the shield would have a boss. The ridge strengthened the structure, and it also would deflect sword blows. In some of these helmets, especially later when they get large and can-like, getting hit on the head would deafen you and sort of knock your lights out. Even if it didn't do real damage, the clang would just about stun you. This one is not that large a helmet that's likely to have happened. What you can see here is that the nose and the ridge are made in the form of animals. They pick up motifs that you've seen earlier, and they're very beautifully wrought of gold and silver. The body of the entire helmet is silver. We can finish with a minute of contemplation of this helmet, which is just amazing. It's worth just looking at for a bit.